This is Hallicrafters Rehabs, and welcome back. I've been busy. I finished cleaning these switches, and basically removing the screws that can hold these phenol connecting assemblies and moving them back and forth and so forth, and getting inside there with one of these. This is actually an artist eraser, and I put a little bit of the deoxit grease on the tip of it, and just went around and got both sides of those switches. And then I put the screws back in here and here, and the set screws and so forth. And so now everything is back together on this side. And for the most part, I set up leads to connect to the rest of the set when the rest of the electronics get put back in. And there are a few components because of access and everything, I went ahead and replaced. This is a mica capacitor down here instead of, I think it was it was a mica that it replaced, and that mica had some leakage in it, but it probably didn't matter whether it did or not because it's in the oscillator circuit, low voltage. But anyway, it's replaced. And this mica I'm not replacing yet. It's, the conventional wisdom, it's important to the alignment of the dial and all this kind of stuff, and the hand select these things, maybe. I'm not sure. That, assembly lines are pretty, I don't know how big an assembly line was at Hallicrafters, 70 years ago, and how much time they spent on this. It measured pretty close to the standard value, and in reality, because of aging and everything else in there, we're going to wind up having to go through some of the modifications that I did on the SX-99 to get and I've documented that in one of my earlier videos. This is an important value for moving the whole band left or right on the dial, so to speak. And then there's another trimmer capacitor like this on these coils, and that's sort of makes it go like this and this. So you can have it in the wrong position, and that won't work, and you have it in the wrong position this way, and that won't work. And there is even a planned error characteristic in analog receivers, which, if you'll notice this, on the extreme left and on the extreme right, it seems like the band expands a little bit in each direction. You address that not here, but on the main tuning capacitor, and I'll show you how that happens. Way down the road when that happens. We're only in part 4 of this SX-99 full. It's more like a rebuild and update rather than a restoration. I don't want to bring it back to 1969. I want to bring it to a tube radio that is extremely effective in 2020. So, with as much of the original as I can. That's my goals. So this part's ready. You see it's prepped for painting, but I'm not painting yet. There's a reason for that. Okay. I've been working hours and hours on this chassis. It's mostly experimentation because it had some spotty rust on it, and it still does, and various methods have been used, mainly different kinds of sandpaper up in here, wet, just slowly let the sandpaper do the work. Start with 1,000 and then 1,500 and then 2,000 and 2,500, and I wet it with alcohol, not water, because I don't want to activate any rust or anything during the process. So there is a tiny bit of water in the United States alcohol. This is 91%, and I don't know if you can get 100%. I would rather use 100%. So anyway, I'm slowly wet sanding this, and it gets a pretty respectable shine, but you can still see the imperfections. I'm not sure it shows up on the camera, but it's not imperfections. It's really where the chassis has a cadmium electrostatic coating or some sort of coating on the outside to avoid rust, and of course that's been compromised over the years, and that's where the spots come from. And so doing this, of course, removes that, and so you get a kind of a cloudy effect associated with that, and it's very hard to really get those spots to disappear. So I've been trying a number of different techniques. Over here has been just sandpaper. But being a backyard astronomer, which I haven't had my telescope out in about, I'm not going to tell you. I have ground my own telescope mirrors. And when you do that, you take let's say it's a 6-inch you're grinding, 2 flat, round, thick glass blanks. And then you'll take, it's on a rotating table, you put the blank down, you'll put, you start with like 5, not 500, or a very rough grit, and you just go back and forth like this, 20 strokes, like that. Then you rotate it 30 degrees and do it again, and do it again. And with the rough grit, you essentially get the shape of the telescope. But the point behind this is each grit makes grooves into the glass, and then you follow it with a smaller grit. And the smaller grit's purpose, once you have the shape, the smaller grit's purpose is to round out or smooth out all those valleys or gouges that the heavier grit did. And you keep successively reducing the grit until you get down to 500. And you've got the top becomes the tool, the bottom becomes the mirror, and so that this gets the curve in it, and this has an inverse curve. But you use a tool and you grind. You're grinding it this way with these powders that are wet. So, as somebody who likes to, repurpose things for new ideas and things like that, will this work on a chassis? And this is the last grit you use before you go to rouge. It says you get these from there we are. Get that in. This is silicon carbide 500. You get it from Wilhelm Bell. There are several people online that you can order this stuff from. And it says red rouge. That's kind of funny. So if it were green, it would be green vert. Rouge means red in French. So it's kind of duplicative. But anyway, this is the last step. This is when you want that blank surface to be smooth enough to silver into a mirror, and you're at the angstrom level of light when you're grinding with that. So what can we achieve with this on a chassis? Yes, why not? If you know about it, why not try it? So the first thing, I found the right procedure is really to start with a rough grit sandpaper, because this is fair. It doesn't feel deep, but it is deep. If you looked at this under a microscope, a cross section of it, you would see that the rust has got little fingers and and down into the metal and all that kind of stuff. So it's there, and so you're grinding that out, and then I come back with wet sandpaper and I smooth that out, and then I'll come back with this as I'm using as a tool, and I'll just wet that with alcohol. And you can't outside. I've got this at close up. I don't need to have it close up now. There we go. There's the alcohol up there. You just dip it in alcohol, then into the powder. And you wear gloves and old clothes and put it on something, and don't get this on anything because this stuff gets everywhere. Okay, so and you dip it in here and you just do round motion. So I'm going to do a little surface here as a demonstration to give an idea how that works. And then probably I may just finish it off and paint it, because you'll see that even with this, what you won't do is you'll end up removing all of this coating that was put on here to inhibit rust. And I did go over it with this Renaissance Micro Wax wax polish, whatever that is. But I get nothing from these people, don't worry. I get nothing from nobody. So that would last for a while. However, the point behind this is to show you how you could use this for a chassis if you have one that you really want to need to polish up and out. And even if you did like Tipton did and have it covered, this gives a really smooth surface for painting. It's so smooth that I'm considering using, I'll have to go look, but I have this paint, but it's, that big fat thick primer and all that kind of stuff. You won't need to prime it, because it will be perfectly smooth, and you will not, and if you don't use a primer, every imperfection shows. But with this stuff, there will be no imperfections to show. So anyway, let me set up in a little bit, and I'll show you how I do this. Okay, so I got my light on, because you do need light for this. And the first thing we're going to do is, this is the area that we're going to work on here. That's one of my objectives in restoring radios, is to teach me patience. It's not been very effective, and maybe this will do it, because this will go slow. But I will speed up the tape, so to speak, between each step, so you don't have to sit here and watch gritty alcohol dry. So I'm using 320 grit sandpaper. Okay, it's rough. Okay, Yes, it's going to take that coating off. This is an area that didn't get, and it's making scratches. Now I'm trying to use, don't go back and forth like I did like that. You want to use circular, and you want the sandpaper to do the job to stop putting pressure down with my arms. It doesn't like it anyway with a plate and 12 screws. So just, it's going to look rough. We have to get down to the bottom of the roots, which is another reason why you wouldn't need a primer. If you remove this rust completely, then you are basically starting with fresh aluminum or steel, whatever it is, which I think is steel. Heavy enough to be. So I'm speeding up the tape now. That's because I'm really going this way now. Enough. Joke. My jokes don't work anyway. Yes, use gloves. Not because of anything other than, unless you want to have really colorful hands when you go to church tomorrow. All right, on the next, I use these cotton rounds for, I want my chassis to look so gorgeous. Actually, they're really good for just a simple rub down with alcohol. Just use it on your face before you use it on the chassis. I don't know why I would rub my face down with alcohol. Maybe after getting this stuff all over my face, I might want to. So now it's with it cleaned, we can see it really is got most of this stuff. A couple places I want to get. All right. Back it down again, because you want all that loose stuff off of it before you go to the next layer. So the next, after a lot of different experimentations, the next thing I want to do is go ahead and use the 500. So I get my tool. This came off of one of those wood benches that I have no idea what these are for on those wood benches. But anyway, get that wet with alcohol, dip it in here. And it's not got enough alcohol. Right, you want kind of a little paste like this. and you're going to let the grit do the work. You're not going to push down on it at all. On that mirror that I ground, I probably spent 40 hours of mirror grinding. And at each, at the early stage, you are just trying to get the shape of the mirror in a convex shape. And by rotating that little table around and using the same number of strokes, the same kind of pressure, you slowly grind it down. Let's get some more. To the shape you need, and how you test it is it's called a Foucault knife edge tester. And it just takes a knife edge across a thin light source, and that makes a pattern of interference when reflected through the surface of the glass that you're going to make into a mirror. And that reflection, it's actually refraction, will be a series of concentric circles. And when you get it right, because you've got the distances set for the focal length you're looking for, there's no rings. And the story goes, the legend, that when they were making the Hubble Space Telescope, NASA was so proud of themselves in a brand new laser cutting, glass etching to the precision, to the wavelength, calculations and focal length and all this kind of stuff, and so precise. It's all robotic. No humans can possibly grind a mirror this good. And you know what happened? They discovered that the Hubble Space Telescope was exactly, and I mean exactly, they did a perfect job of cutting that mirror, 1/2 wavelength of light off in its focal length, which made it a blurry image everywhere. Over the whole, everything it was looking at had a blurry image because it was, the focal length was built in 1/2 wavelength off. It couldn't be corrected until you basically took all the mirrors out and built a whole new telescope inside the telescope to compensate for that. That's what the billions of dollars was to update the Hubble Space Telescope. So had they used a simple backyard astronomer Foucault knife edge tester on that mirror, they would have found the error in seconds. That is a lesson for everyone, that I don't care what you're using, what test instrument you're using, or what you're doing, at the end you have to step back and you have to say, is this reasonable? Is this right? I think there's a legend also at Hallicrafters or somebody like that, or it may have been NASA, where back in the early days that they had this character that didn't have a college degree. I think it was NASA, and they ran all their circuits through this guy, and he would put it together to see if it worked. Put it together to see if it works, and then nothing would go out that he didn't do. And when he finished with it, it worked. That's the reasonableness test. My first job at Stone & Webster. there was an operational experience section. All these us young engineers that knew nothing, okay, right out of college, our beautiful little designs we take over there, and it'd come back bled all over. So, just to show you, theoretical is where you get the ideas, but practical is where you get it working. Okay. And of course, if you want this to be done, if you're patient, you do this for 20 minutes. If you have learned patience, you do this for an hour or 2 hours. So, one thing I didn't make clear was you can see how this makes a mess. And this is loose grit. And that's why I prepped it for painting, whether I'm going to paint it or not. Because you absolutely do not want this stuff inside where that switch is. Ever. So that's why I prepped it for painting. And it seems to be working good. Now, after you've done some sanding, it's only been a nanosecond. No, it's been longer than that, but not that long. That was probably 10 minutes. Just want to see what you got here. So you just clean it off here. Just like a telescope mirror. Let's see what you got. It's because you just can't stand it. You got to see if you're making any progress. Because you're impatient. Even though it's supposed to teach you patience. Okay. So I'm not sure you're able to really see that I'm sitting there with my eyes right on it. Okay. So, yeah, this needs some more work in here. It's a little bloomy, so to speak. Usually you do around these screws. I didn't want to remove every single screw. I did not want to remove the switch. That's another evolution that I don't want to learn unless I have to. I don't want to come up to the end of this and have some big hokey. The switch works well. It's not broken or anything. And so we were able to do a really good cleaning job with that switch. So, of course, it looks, I don't think you can really see. I can back up this a little bit and come in close, but yeah, it's not very clear. But now one thing we could do is I can shine a light so you can see how. Here we go. See if that helps you. You doesn't really. I like to shine and reflect back to the camera, and that's really hard to do. So maybe from this way. Yeah, these batteries are almost dead too. I go through so many batteries you couldn't. I'm the battery company's best friend. Alright, so now we're going to take this and we're not going to use the tool. We're just going to soak this good in one of these pads and soak it good in alcohol and then dip it in the grit and go over it like this. Now this is just going to be a smoothing action because with the tool you're going to create some gouges at that grit level, and so this is to smooth out those gouges and get a nice smooth surface. And so you don't need to watch all this. I'll be doing this for a little while. So I've gone over it with one of these and the powder and then cleaned it off. And I've lowered the camera a little bit. Maybe you can see where that protective coating has come off. But you can also see, let me try the camera. Let's do it this. Oh yes, it gets really quite smooth. It's not actually mirror-like yet, but we haven't done the rouge yet. I think I'm going to do a 2500 grit before I do that. Let's see how that works. So this is 2500 grit, and we're just going over it lightly. 2500 is considered polishing for an automobile. But not for a chassis. The thing about sandpaper is the stuff just accumulates between the grains in sandpaper, and so you use it up pretty fast. You can use up a lot of sandpaper trying to do it this way, whereas this other stuff just keeps on working. Even my little cloth becomes a tool itself because it just gets so saturated with grit and alcohol that you can just keep using it without adding anything. Just sort of blends and smooths in. This is the area that I did earlier, and I'm over here working this side just like that. Small areas. I did the edge. Okay, that's probably as much as I can do with that. Now we're going to go to the rouge. I'll come around. Rouge. Lots of alcohol. Good chunk of rouge, and you want to make a, well, just like that, a little paste with it. Going to go over where I went before just to sort of do a blended in kind of thing. Just keep on adding alcohol, rouge, liquidy, not a paste, but a solution of rouge and alcohol. That's better. Now you see why you want to prep this thing for painting, because and it gets everywhere and you wear gloves. Maybe rouge sounds better than red, huh? That's why we call it rouge. We could call it lal in Hindi. Okay. There we go. How much? Well, just like everything else, you have to check it and see. Guess how much you need to do first, and then wipe it off and see how it works. Alrighty. Has nothing to do with drying. We just need to wipe it off. It's nothing but another form of grit. So we take alcohol, start wiping. And starting to look nice. Wow. I haven't given up hope. I still think I need to paint it because of the propensity to rust. Because without that coating on, well, with the coating on it rusted, right? So what good is the coating? I don't make radios that rust, period. Get some more of these. We go through these pretty fast. That's why we buy the cheapest for the mostest. Mostest for the cheapest. Okay. Well, you don't need to see all this. I'll keep working on this, and then we'll come back. Okay, so I have gone over this chassis with 320 all across with 320 grit sandpaper. It looks kind of like a mess, but it's not. That's just the valleys of the sandpaper go in different directions, which is a good thing, actually. I'll go over it with my iPhone here, Star Wars like, as you go through, and you can see the valleys of the sandpaper going in different places. And now there are very, very few visible imperfections. Enough to the point where I think, well, let's put it on video this time. What do you say? All right, let's try this again. All right, so here it is. And there are very few imperfections. And whatever's there really will probably come out when we get to the finer grit. Now let's try looking down on it. This is how I went through to find all the spots and remove it by just using my headlamp like that. It's really hard to do this with through an iPhone. Okay, maybe that. Anyway, so you can, when you're looking straight down, then you can see exactly where you need to touch up with the sandpaper. So the next step then is going to be I think I'm going to use, if I have 1,000, I'll use 1,000, otherwise it'll be 1,500. I think it's just, all I've got left is 1,500. So there's a piece of 1,500. So we're going to begin the process again now. And the idea is to remove the valleys. Let's put the gloves back on, unless I like colored fingers for church. Alright. So, now we're just going to go over the top. Now I've already done the sides as well. That went very fast. There's very little to do on the sides. So all we're going to do is wet sand the 320 with 1500. And sit here and make you watch this right. Okay, so we'll come back after that's done. Get that nose there. Actually, it's not mirror quality. That's as good as it gets, which is pretty good. If you absolutely had to not paint the chassis and wanted to keep the look, then this is about as good as this one will go. And you can use the method I was talking about, including the rouge, which really gives it a nice shine, but you can also see it's two-tone shine. And you're just not going to get rid of that. Pretty good though. Pretty good. But that's, I did forget. I had some of this semi-chrome polish. It's a cadmium polish for chrome, and it does a nice job, as you can see. However, I don't want this. When you look inside, you'll still see, your eyes will go directly to the imperfections. So, it's going to be painted. And instead of this color, I've been thinking about and wanting Bucking to use this color, a brilliant copper. We'll see how that works. So, however, this has cadmium polish all over it, and I need to remove it actually. So I'll do that with alcohol and rouge. And so when you're applying it, you're just making a little paste like this. And that will prep the surface so that the paint will take. We don't need any slick polishes on top. Also, I'm going to have to get down inside there with a Q-tip before painting. So you just pile that on like this. Now the top is the only place where I use that cadmium. On the sides it's been smoothed out with. And, hello, let's use gloves, shall we? Thus I won't paint any fingers for Sunday school class. Just in time, let me tell you. It's rude stuff. It's not dangerous or anything. It's just whatever you like red, get this on it. That's why they call it rouge. Or they could have called it red. So we're just going to make this nice little solution of alcohol and rouge all around here, and rub it lightly. It doesn't have to be hard, and you don't have to wait on that. So I'll be back. All right, so the big moment has come. I rubbed it down with rouge and alcohol, and it still had kind of a greasy feel to it. So I cleaned it off with 409 and rubbed it down with that. And then rubbed it down with just a heavy shop towel and alcohol, so to get even any kind of residual soap off. So it's got a nice squeaky feel surface. And what I'm using is this kind it's just a simple metallic finish, bright coat metallic finish, Rust-Oleum. They don't give me any money for that either. And it doesn't have a primer, which is what I specifically sought out, because I want as thin a coat as I can, just enough to look really good, and at the same time not be up to real heavy, thick kind of paint that normally is the case with when you have primer plus the color. And to do that, you've got to have a really smooth surface, because any kind of defect in the surface is going to show up. So, let's turn this off to make it easier to see. Here goes nothing. Oh, that's going to look really good. Should I be wearing a mask? Oh, it said, boy, this stuff smells. Alright, we'll put this up and then put a mask on. Alright, so that's the first coat. We're just going to let that dry. I'll find a mask. Ah, yes. Put on gloves after you need them. Put on mask after you need it. That's the way I think. Alright, let me find a mask. So, I have my mask on. I'll use this for the coronavirus. Actually, you're supposed to wear it to protect yourself from other people. Actually, to protect other people from you. And this is not very much of a mask for painting, but it's what I got. Alright. It's great. How about that? Yeah, I noticed there are little ding marks and things like that. So be it. Okay. So, but it's looking really good. I'm using the cheap Chinese, the ultra cheap Chinese knockoff camera that I switched to, rather than the next to ultra cheap Chinese knockoff camera that I normally use. Just in case paint gets on the lens. In this case, you won't be able to tell the difference. Okay. So, I have put a little protection on the underside. We'll just do this face right here, and that's all we can do for a little while it dries. Let's not paint it yet. With ultra thin type coats like this, dripping is disaster. So, we're going to let that just sit for 15 minutes and come back and do some more. I'm going to call this one beautiful chassis. So the paint is on. We're going to let it put just very light coats, several on there. There's no imperfections other than a few little dings that have accumulated on the surface of the chassis over the years. Tiny little stuff. And so this will dry, and then we'll be ready for the next stage. Okay, so I've switched back to the less than totally cheap Chinese back imitation camera, and I'm going to wrap this video up here while this dries out. Remembering now that chrome polish, I'll probably use that on the underside because it was not damaged by any rust. But this is going to be a beautiful receiver when we're done. I hope some of my techniques with astronomy mirror polishing might be useful to folks in the future. So at any rate, we had to paint it anyway because of the fact that the outer coating on the chassis had been damaged by rust. So it still is going to be a very beautiful radio. And this is Hallicrafters Rehabs. Thanks for watching, and thanks for the new subscribers.